"Ma'am, step off the yacht. This area isn't for people like you." The words didn't echo. They cut, sharp and deliberate, slicing through the polished air of the Miami International Yacht Showcase like a blade through silk. And for a moment, everything else, the champagne glasses clinking, the low hum of investors talking millions, the soft sway of $20 million vessels rocking against their slips, seemed to pause just long enough to let that sentence land exactly where it was meant to, right on Naomi Carter's chest, except she didn't flinch, not even a blink, not even a breath out of rhythm, because she had heard versions of that sentence before, just dressed in nicer language, whispered instead of spoken, hidden behind smiles instead of delivered like a verdict, but the meaning was always the same, and standing there in a simple ivory linen dress that brushed just below her knees. Flat leather sandals. No jewelry except a thin gold watch. Naomi looked nothing like what Ethan Blake expected when he turned his body halfway to block the narrow teak boarding ramp leading onto the flagship yacht. His navy blazer crisp, sunglasses resting on his head, badge clipped high enough for everyone to see his authority. His eyes scanning her again from head to toe like he was double-checking his assumption hadn't made a mistake. And it hadn't, not in his mind, because to him, she was out of place, an interruption, a problem to remove before anyone important noticed. And just behind him, a couple leaned casually against the railing of the yacht, both white, both sipping something cold and expensive, watching with mild curiosity that quickly shifted into quiet agreement as the man gave a subtle shake of his head and muttered, "They really need to tighten security at these events." Not loud enough to cause a scene, but loud enough for Naomi to hear. And still, she didn't respond, not to him, not to Ethan, not to the small circle of glances beginning to form around her, because her silence wasn't confusion, it wasn't hesitation, it was control. The kind of control built over years of walking into rooms where people decided who you were before you said a word, the kind of control that didn't rush to defend itself. Because it didn't need to, and Ethan mistook that silence instantly, his posture shifting just slightly, emboldened, stepping half an inch closer, as if proximity alone could push her back. "Guest list only," he added, his tone flatter now, colder, as if he'd already resolved the situation in his head and was just waiting for her to comply. And for a brief second, the ocean breeze moved through the marina, carrying the scent of salt and fuel and polished wood, brushing lightly against Naomi's face as she looked past him, not at him, but beyond him, at the rows of yachts stretching across the water, each one a floating symbol of wealth, access, and belonging. And something in her eyes shifted, not anger, not even annoyance, but recognition. Like she had seen this exact moment before, lived it in another time, another place, and decided long ago how it would end. But Ethan didn't see that. He only saw what he expected to see, and behind them, a young staff member paused mid-step, clipboard in hand, his gaze flickering between Naomi and the yacht, uncertainty beginning to crack through the surface of what everyone else seemed so sure about, while a few feet away. Another guest lowered her phone slightly, no longer pretending not to watch, because something about the stillness of this woman, the way she stood without backing up, without raising her voice, without asking for permission, didn't match the role she had just been assigned, and the tension didn't explode. It tightened, quietly, like a wire being pulled inch by inch, and right at the center of it, Naomi Carter remained exactly where she was, unmoved, as if the space itself had already decided. She belonged there, whether anyone else understood it yet or not. Naomi Carter did not step back. She did not argue. She simply let the silence stretch long enough for everyone around them to feel it, like the tide pulling away before anyone realizes what is coming next. And then she tilted her head slightly, her gaze still calm, still steady, not fixed on Ethan Blake, but drifting just past him as if he were already becoming irrelevant. And when she finally spoke, her voice was low, even, measured in a way that did not ask for permission and did not offer explanation. "Interesting," she said, just that single word, and somehow it landed heavier than anything raised voices could have delivered, because it was not defensive, it was observational, like she was noting something down rather than reacting to it, and that unsettled him more than resistance would have, his jaw tightening just enough to give it away before he straightened his posture again, doubling down on the authority he believed he had. "There is nothing interesting about it," he replied, his tone sharper now. Private event, private access, and you are not on the list. And he gestured subtly toward the clipboard tucked under the arm of a nearby staff member, as if that piece of paper held more legitimacy than the entire marina behind him. And Naomi's eyes followed the motion briefly, before returning to the horizon line where sunlight danced across the water in fractured gold reflections. And for a second, her expression softened, not in submission but in memory, because she had stood at docks like this before, years ago, when the smell of salt air carried something very different, something closer to rejection than opportunity. When she had been 19 and wearing borrowed shoes that did not quite fit, standing outside a smaller boat showcase in Charleston while a man at the entrance told her, without even looking twice, that the event was not open to the public, even though she had a printed pass in her hand, and she remembered how she had folded that pass slowly, carefully, like it might still matter if she handled it right, and how she had walked away without a word because back then she did not yet have the language to challenge it, only the determination to outgrow it. And now, standing here again, older, sharper, carrying a presence that did not need validation, the same pattern unfolded in front of her like a script that had never been updated, and behind Ethan, the couple on the yacht had stopped pretending not to watch. The woman leaning slightly toward her companion and whispering something that ended in a quiet laugh, not loud, not aggressive, just dismissive enough to blend into the background noise of wealth and assumption, while a few feet away the young staff member with the clipboard hesitated, flipping a page as if searching for something he could not quite place, his eyes flicking up again toward Naomi, then back down, uncertainty growing with each second. He could not reconcile what he was seeing with what he had been told to expect, and Naomi noticed him, not directly, but in the way you notice a shift in air pressure before a storm, and she took one slow step forward, not onto the yacht, not yet, just enough to close the distance that Ethan had tried to create, and he reacted instantly, raising a hand slightly, not touching her, but signaling a boundary he believed he controlled. "I would not do that," he said, and there it was again, not just instruction but assumption, the belief that he defined where she could stand, where she could move, what she could access, and Naomi's lips curved almost imperceptibly, not into a smile, but into something closer to recognition, as if she had just confirmed a theory she had been testing from the moment she arrived. And somewhere behind them, a phone screen lit up, as someone began recording, not dramatically, not openly, just quietly documenting what was unfolding. Because even without knowing the full story yet, people could feel that something about this moment did not sit right, that the calm at its center did not match the narrative being forced around it. And Naomi reached into the small leather clutch at her side, not rushed, not defensive, just deliberate, her fingers brushing against her phone as if selecting the next move in a game she had already played 100 times before. And when she lifted her eyes again, this time she looked directly at Ethan Blake, not past him, not through him, but at him, steady and unshaken, and in that look there was no request, no apology, no hesitation, only the quiet certainty of someone who had already decided how this was going to end. The moment Naomi Carter's eyes locked onto Ethan Blake, something shifted in the air, subtle but undeniable, like pressure building before a storm no one had planned for, and Ethan felt it even if he did not understand it, his fingers tightening slightly against the edge of the boarding rail, as if grounding himself in authority he suddenly needed to reinforce, while Naomi's hand remained steady around her phone, not raised yet, not used yet, just present, and that alone seemed to draw more attention than any argument could have, because people nearby had started to notice the pattern, the imbalance, the way one person spoke with force while the other held silence like it carried weight. And from the far end of the dock, another staff member approached at a measured pace, radio clipped to his shoulder, his posture more rigid, more procedural, the kind of presence that usually ended conversations rather than escalated them. And Ethan glanced toward him briefly, relief flickering across his face before he masked it again. "We have a situation," he said under his breath as the man stepped closer, his tone shifting just enough to suggest this had moved beyond a simple misunderstanding, and the new arrival nodded once, scanning Naomi with a practiced look that categorized before it questioned. "Ma'am, I am going to need you to step away from the restricted area," he said, his voice calm but firm, rehearsed, the kind of tone designed to close a door without appearing aggressive. And Naomi listened without interrupting, her expression unchanged, her posture still aligned with the water behind her, as if the entire marina was part of her perspective, not something she was being excluded from. And when she finally spoke again, it was not to defend herself, but to clarify something far more important. "Who defines restricted?" she asked, her voice quiet but precise, each word placed exactly where it needed to be. And the question lingered longer than expected because it did not fit the script. It did not challenge authority directly. It questioned its foundation. And for a fraction of a second the man hesitated, just enough for the young staff member with the clipboard to step forward slightly, his voice uncertain but present. "Actually, I think I saw her name earlier," he said, not loud, not confident, but enough to cut through the certainty Ethan had been projecting. And Ethan turned sharply toward him, irritation flashing across his face. "You did not," he snapped, quick and dismissive. But the hesitation had already spread. Subtle glances exchanged between guests. A shift in body language that suggested doubt had entered the room, even if no one wanted to say it out loud. And Naomi noticed all of it without turning her head, without breaking her composure, because this was the part she had anticipated, not the insult, not the barrier, but the moment the system began to question itself. And she let that moment breathe, did not rush to fill it, did not rescue it, just allowed it to expand, until even Ethan felt the need to reassert control again, stepping forward slightly, his voice louder now, sharper. "This is not up for debate," he said, projecting outward as much as he was directing it at her. "You are not authorized to be here." And that word authorized hung in the air like a final decision, like something official, something unquestionable. But Naomi's eyes did not waver, and slowly, deliberately, she lifted her phone, not to show anything, not yet, just enough to signal that the next move had already been decided. And somewhere behind her, a quiet voice murmured, "This is about to go differently." Not loud enough to draw attention, but enough to capture the exact feeling settling over the dock. Because what had started as a simple dismissal was no longer contained. It had become something else entirely, something layered, something that was no longer just about access to a yacht, but about who decided belonging in the first place. And standing at the center of it, Naomi Carter remained exactly as she had been from the start, still, composed, and completely in control of a situation that had not yet revealed why. The phone in Naomi Carter's hand did not move quickly. It rose with intention, steady and unhurried, as if time itself had slowed just enough to make every eye on the dock follow the motion. And when the screen lit against her palm, she did not immediately dial. She did not announce anything. She simply looked at it for half a second like she was confirming a decision already made long before she ever stepped foot near the water. And that pause unsettled Ethan Blake more than anything else so far, because there was no panic in it, no attempt to prove herself, only certainty. And certainty without explanation has a way of making people question their own authority. And around them, the subtle hum of the yacht showcase began to shift, conversations thinning out, attention redirecting in quiet waves as more people turned to watch. Not because of volume, but because of contrast, because one side of the exchange had grown louder while the other remained completely controlled, and that imbalance drew focus like gravity. And the young staff member with the clipboard took another hesitant step forward, his voice lower now, more careful. "I really think we should double-check the registry," he said, glancing between Ethan and the security officer. And this time the suggestion did not disappear as easily. It lingered, carried by the growing number of witnesses who had started to recognize that something did not align, that the confidence of the people enforcing the rules did not quite match the calm of the person being excluded. And Ethan felt it slipping, not his authority exactly, but the unquestioned acceptance of it. And he reacted the only way he knew how, by tightening his stance and raising his voice just enough to reclaim the space. "We are not double-checking anything," he said sharply. "We know who belongs here." And the phrasing landed heavier than he intended, because it was no longer just about a guest list. It was about belonging, and the word echoed in the air like something larger than the moment. And Naomi heard it, fully, completely, but she did not challenge it directly. Instead, she pressed her thumb lightly against her phone and brought it to her ear, her movements smooth, deliberate, almost quiet enough to miss if you were not already watching closely. And when she spoke, her voice did not rise above the tension. It cut through it, calm and exact. "This is Naomi," she said. No introduction, no explanation, just a name delivered like it carried weight on its own. And there was a brief pause as she listened, her eyes still on Ethan, still steady, before she added, "Proceed." Just that one word. And then she lowered the phone again, not with drama, not with emphasis, just placing it back at her side as if she had completed something routine, something expected, and for a moment nothing happened, at least not visibly. The dock remained the same. The yacht still rocked gently against their slips. The sunlight still scattered across the water, and Ethan let out a small breath through his nose, a flicker of confidence returning as he interpreted the lack of immediate change as validation. "That is not going to help you," he said, his tone shifting back toward controlled dismissal, but it did not land the same way this time, because the silence that followed Naomi's call was different. It was not empty. It was loaded, like a countdown no one else could see yet, and the security officer glanced briefly toward his radio, then back at her, uncertainty beginning to edge into his posture, while the young staff member with the clipboard stopped flipping pages entirely, his attention fixed now, waiting, and from somewhere behind the growing circle of onlookers a voice murmured, almost under a breath, "She is not bluffing." And that was the moment the atmosphere changed completely. Not with noise, not with movement, but with awareness, the kind that spreads quietly from one person to another until it becomes impossible to ignore. And Naomi Carter stood at the center of it all, exactly as she had been from the beginning, composed, grounded, and entirely unbothered. As if everything unfolding now was simply the next step in a process she had already set in motion long before anyone else realized they were part of it. The seconds after Naomi Carter lowered her phone did not feel like ordinary time. They stretched, quiet but heavy, and even the water seemed to move slower against the dock as if the marina itself was holding its breath. And Ethan Blake tried to fill that silence again, because silence no longer worked in his favor. "If you are finished making calls, I need you to step away now," he said, his voice tighter than before, not louder, just more controlled in a way that revealed effort. And Naomi did not respond immediately. She simply looked at him, steady, unblinking, and that look carried something different now, not just calm, but finality, like a decision had already been executed somewhere beyond this dock, and they were only waiting for it to arrive. And behind them the young staff member shifted his weight again, glancing down at his clipboard as if it might suddenly provide answers it had refused to show moments ago. And then it happened, not with a shout, not with a dramatic interruption, but with a subtle vibration from the security officer's radio, a soft crackle that cut through the air just enough to draw his attention, and he lifted it instinctively, pressing the button as he listened, his posture changing almost immediately, shoulders tightening, eyes narrowing slightly as the voice on the other end spoke faster than expected, more urgent than routine communication usually required, and he did not respond right away, which was unusual, and Ethan noticed that. "What is it?" he asked, irritation slipping into his tone, but the officer held up a hand, not to dismiss him, but to focus, because whatever he was hearing was not aligning with what he thought he knew, and the crowd sensed it too, a ripple of curiosity moving through the onlookers as the atmosphere shifted from confrontation to anticipation, and Naomi remained still, her expression unchanged, but her presence now felt anchored, like she was no longer standing in the situation. The situation was unfolding around her, and finally the officer spoke, his voice lower now, more cautious. "Can you repeat that?" he said into the radio, and the pause that followed was longer this time, long enough for Ethan's confidence to start slipping in visible increments, his jaw tightening, his stance adjusting, as if preparing for something he could not yet define. And then the officer lowered the radio slowly, his eyes moving from Naomi to Ethan and back again, uncertainty written clearly across his face. "There has been an update," he said, choosing his words carefully, and Ethan let out a short, dismissive breath, trying to regain ground. "There is no update that changes this," he replied quickly, too quickly, but the officer did not nod this time, did not reinforce him. Instead he hesitated, just enough for the silence to return in a different form, heavier, more directional, like it was pointing somewhere specific. And Naomi took one small step forward again, not crossing the boundary Ethan had set, but standing close enough now that the space between them felt intentional. And she spoke, her voice even, precise. "You might want to hear it," she said, not as a suggestion, but as a statement of fact, and Ethan's eyes flicked toward the officer, searching for confirmation, for alignment, for anything that would restore the structure he had been relying on. But the officer's hesitation had already said too much, and behind them the murmurs began to build, quiet at first, then slightly louder as more people leaned in, trying to understand what was shifting beneath the surface. And the young staff member finally stopped pretending to check his clipboard, his attention fully locked now, waiting. Because whatever was coming next was no longer about a guest list, and Naomi Carter stood exactly where she needed to be, not reacting, not pushing, just allowing the truth she had already set in motion to make its way into the open, 1 second at a time. The security officer did not answer immediately, and that silence told more truth than any explanation could have, his grip on the radio tightening slightly, as if the weight of what he had just heard was still settling into place. And when he finally looked at Ethan Blake again, there was something missing from his expression, something that had been there moments before, certainty, and it did not return. "They are asking us to pause all access control on Dock 3, he said carefully, each word measured, as if he was still processing them himself, and Ethan blinked once, caught off guard by the phrasing alone. "Pause access," he repeated, his voice rising just enough to betray the crack forming beneath his control. "That does not make any sense." And the officer did not argue, did not defend the instruction. He simply added, "It came from operations." And that changed the air again, because operations did not issue vague directives, they issued decisions, and those decisions did not come without reason, and behind them the murmurs grew louder, more defined now. People leaning closer, some lifting their phones a little higher, not to capture a spectacle, but to document a shift, because what had been presented as a simple removal was now unraveling into something far more complicated. And Naomi Carter did not move, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, as if she had expected this exact moment down to the second, and Ethan felt it slipping further. The structure he had been standing on no longer solid, and he turned slightly toward the officer, lowering his voice in an attempt to regain control without drawing attention. "Then call them back," he said, quick, almost sharp. "Clarify it, because we are not just letting anyone walk onto a $40 million vessel." And the officer hesitated again, not because he did not understand the instruction, but because something about it no longer aligned with what he had just heard, and that hesitation stretched long enough for the young staff member with the clipboard to speak again, this time a little more certain. "Her name is in the system," he said, flipping the page fully now, his finger tracing down a list that had not changed. "Carter, Naomi, it is right here." And the words landed clean, clear, undeniable. And for a brief second, everything stopped. Even the breeze seemed to quiet as the information settled into the space. And Ethan turned toward him sharply, disbelief flashing across his face. "That is not possible," he said, but it sounded weaker this time, less like a fact and more like a defense. And Naomi finally shifted her gaze, not dramatically, just enough to acknowledge the young man, and she gave the smallest nod, not of gratitude, but of recognition, like he had simply done what was already true. And then she looked back at Ethan, her voice calm, steady, and now unmistakably direct. "You said you knew who belongs here," she said, each word placed with precision. "So let us test that." And there was no challenge in her tone, no anger, just a quiet invitation to confront the difference between assumption and reality. And Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out immediately, because the room, the dock, the entire space around them had shifted beyond his control, and somewhere behind the growing crowd a new sound cut through the tension, not loud, not dramatic, but distinct, the low approach of a golf cart moving quickly along the Marina path, its presence drawing heads to turn instinctively, because movement meant something was coming, something external, something official, and the officer glanced in that direction first, then back at Naomi. And in that moment it became clear to anyone paying attention that whatever was about to arrive was not for her. It was because of her, and Naomi Carter stood exactly where she had been from the start, not stepping forward, not stepping back. simply allowing the truth to catch up to the moment that had tried to deny it. The sound of the approaching golf cart grew clearer with every second, its low electric hum cutting through the tension like a signal that something official was about to interrupt what had once been a controlled scene. And as it rolled into view along the Marina path, heads turned in unison, conversations stopping mid-sentence, eyes narrowing with curiosity, because whoever was arriving was not part of the spectacle. They were part of the system behind it, and the man driving wore no blazer. No badge displayed for show, just a simple white shirt with a Marina Operations logo stitched over the chest. But the way he stepped out, quick, focused, scanning the dock before locking onto Naomi Carter, told a different story entirely, one that did not match the assumptions still hanging in the air, and Ethan Blake noticed it too. His posture stiffening as he took a half step forward, trying to intercept the situation before it shifted further out of his control. "We have it handled," he said quickly, his voice projecting confidence that no longer felt grounded. But the man did not slow, did not acknowledge Ethan at all. He moved straight toward Naomi, stopping just a few feet in front of her, his expression serious but respectful. And for a brief moment the entire dock seemed to lean in, waiting, because this was the moment where everything either reset or completely changed. And the man spoke, his voice clear, professional, but unmistakably directed. "Ma'am, I have just received confirmation from operations," he said, and Ethan stepped closer, trying to insert himself back into the exchange. "Yes, and we are already addressing." But the man did not turn to him, did not pause. He continued speaking to Naomi as if Ethan's presence no longer carried relevance. "There has been a finalized update regarding Dock 3 ownership and event authority." And that phrase alone sent a ripple through the crowd. Quiet gasps, exchanged looks, phones lifting higher now, because ownership was not a word used lightly in spaces like this. And Naomi did not react outwardly. She simply listened, her expression steady, as if she was hearing something already known. And the man continued, "Effective immediately, all operational control and access authority for this marina has been transferred." And Ethan's breath caught just slightly, his eyes narrowing as he processed the words too slowly to stop them. "Transferred to whom?" he asked, his voice no longer steady. And this time the man finally turned, just enough to acknowledge him, but not enough to validate his position. "To Ms. Naomi Carter," he said, clean, direct, leaving no room for interpretation, and the silence that followed was absolute. Not a whisper, not a movement, just the weight of reality settling into a space that had not been prepared to receive it. And Ethan stood there, frozen for a fraction of a second too long, his mind catching up to a moment that had already passed him. And Naomi finally spoke, her voice calm, measured, but now carrying the full authority of what had just been confirmed. "You said you knew who belongs here," she said, her eyes fixed on him, unwavering. "But you never asked the right question." And the words did not land as an attack. They landed as truth, simple, undeniable, and around them the entire atmosphere shifted, not with noise, but with understanding, because what had just been revealed was not just identity. It was power, real power, the kind that did not need to announce itself until it was already in effect. And Naomi Carter stood exactly where she had been from the beginning. But now the space around her had changed completely, because everyone else finally saw what had been there all along. For a moment Ethan Blake did not move, did not speak. He just stood there as if the entire structure of the situation had collapsed beneath his feet without warning, and the confidence that had filled his posture minutes ago drained away in real time, replaced by something far less stable, something closer to disbelief, because what had just been confirmed was not a misunderstanding. It was a reversal, complete and immediate. And around him, the energy of the dock shifted all at once, not gradually, not quietly, but with a collective awareness that spread through the crowd like a current, people straightening, turning fully now, no longer observing from the edges, but engaging with what had just happened, phones raised higher, whispers turning into clear reactions. And the couple on the yacht who had once watched with quiet amusement now stood frozen, their expressions tightening as they processed their own role in a moment that had just been exposed. And the security officer stepped back half a step, not dramatically, just enough to realign himself with the new reality, his posture no longer blocking Naomi, but opening space around her. and the young staff member lowered his clipboard completely, no longer searching for confirmation because it had already arrived, and Naomi Carter did not step forward immediately. She did not claim the space with movement. She let it come to her, and that was what made it unmistakable, because power that arrives does not need to chase anything. And when she finally spoke again, her voice was calm, steady, but now carried authority that no one could question. "Effective immediately," she said, echoing the language that had just been delivered. Access protocols change, and the words were not loud, but they traveled, because they were not a suggestion, they were a directive, and the man from operations nodded once, already understanding, already adjusting, while Ethan finally found his voice, though it came out uneven. "There must be some mistake," he said, the words thinner now, stripped of the certainty they once carried, and Naomi turned her gaze to him fully, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. "No," she said, simple, direct. "There was a mistake," and she let the pause settle before finishing, "but it was not in the system." And the meaning landed exactly where it needed to, not as an insult, but as a correction, and around them the shift became complete. Staff members repositioning, glances changing direction, respect replacing dismissal in subtle but unmistakable ways, and the officer who had once been ready to remove her now stood beside her, awaiting instruction instead of giving it. And the dock itself felt different. The same yachts, the same polished surfaces, but the power within the space had moved, relocated entirely. And Naomi took one measured step toward the boarding ramp that had been denied to her minutes earlier, not hesitating, not asking, just moving forward as if the barrier had never existed, because in truth it had not in any way that mattered, and no one stopped her this time. No hand raised, no voice interrupted, because the moment for that had passed, and what remained now was recognition, clear and undeniable, that the person they had tried to exclude was the very one who defined the space they were standing in. And as she placed her foot onto the teak surface of the yacht, the silence returned once more, but this time it was not tension, it was acknowledgement, the kind that does not need words to be understood. Naomi Carter moved across the deck with the same quiet confidence she had carried from the moment she arrived, her steps steady against the polished teak as the sunlight reflected softly off the chrome rails and glass panels around her. And behind her the dock remained still, not frozen, but transformed, because everyone watching now understood that what they had witnessed was not just a moment of correction. It was a revelation of something deeper, something that had always been present but never acknowledged. And Ethan Blake remained where he stood, no longer blocking anything, no longer directing anyone, his hands resting at his sides, as if he was still trying to decide what role he now played in a space that had shifted without asking for his permission. And the security officer turned slightly toward him, not with hostility, not with judgment, but with a quiet distance that had not existed before, the kind that forms when authority is reassigned in real time. And the young staff member with the clipboard stepped back fully, his expression no longer uncertain, now clear, as if the situation had resolved itself into something undeniable. And Naomi paused near the center of the yacht, not turning immediately, not addressing the crowd, but taking in the space for a brief second, the Marina stretching out in front of her, rows of vessels aligned like a network she already understood, because she had not come here to impress anyone. She had come to evaluate, to see what existed beneath the surface of polished presentation. And when she finally turned back toward the dock, her gaze moved across the faces watching her, not searching for approval, not seeking reaction, simply acknowledging what had been revealed. And when her eyes met Ethan's again, there was no anger in them, no triumph, only clarity. And she spoke, her voice carrying easily across the short distance, calm, precise, and impossible to ignore. "You did not recognize me," she said, not as an accusation, but as a fact, and she let that settle for a moment before continuing. "That was never the problem." And the words held, drawing every ounce of attention without effort. "The problem is how you treated someone you believed did not matter." And the statement landed clean, not loud, not aggressive, but final. And there was no immediate response, no interruption, because there was nothing to interrupt. The truth did not need reinforcement. It stood on its own, and Naomi's gaze shifted briefly to the rest of the staff. The guests, the observers who had watched the moment unfold from different angles, and her voice softened just slightly, not in weakness, but in intention. Respect is not a reaction, she said. It is a standard. And the words carried beyond the dock, beyond the yacht, settling into the space as something that would remain long after the moment passed. And she turned back toward the water then, her posture relaxed, her presence grounded, as if the situation had already concluded exactly as it was meant to. And behind her the marina resumed its rhythm. Conversations returning, movement picking up again, but nothing felt quite the same, because everyone there had witnessed something that did not rely on volume or force to make its point, something that did not demand attention but commanded it anyway. And Naomi Carter stood at the center of it all without raising her voice, without explaining herself, without asking for anything, because she did not need to. She had not changed the moment, she had revealed it. And in doing so she had made one thing unmistakably clear: she did not belong to the space belonged to her.